Can I follow on that line, sir?
No, she's in it first, and then you need to cool off on that one. Shoot in.
Your strong anti-tax stand in the campaign, why are you allowing Mr. Brady to consider as an option for the SNLs a tax increase?
I'm not. He has thrown out a lot of different possibilities and discussions we've had. We had people that are experts on what a tax is. I would refer you to Richard Darman, who was the head of the OMB, and he's the guy that defined that very well up there with the duck test on the Hill. And well, I'm just saying I'm not prepared to say what I think on it right now till I hear from it, because the more I discuss it, the more you all go out and say this is something that I'm considering when I'm not. It hasn't come to me yet. But I've been around for a long time, and I don't remember hearing people talk about the fee that went into covering the FDIC or FSLIC as a tax. I don't remember people writing that before, but not trying to get into the fight anymore right now. I'll be back. Yeah, Chuck.
You've mentioned ethics in a number of ways, and you've talked about the value of service this year. The last 2 days, we picked up the headlines in the papers, and they've read President Reagan has a $5 million book deal. He's got a $50,000 speech deal. With all respect for the office and the former president, do you think it's appropriate to cash in on the presidency?
No, what I'd call it cashing in. I expect every president has written his memoirs and received money for it. Indeed, I read that a former president, was it Grant? Grant got $500,000. That's when $500,000 really meant something. I mean, you know, so I think there's plenty of tradition that goes with presidents writing memoirs and being paid for it.
But you've also talked about perceptions. Is there a perception problem here?
No, because I think there's been a long history of that, and I don't think it's ever been challenged as inappropriate. Yeah.
Mr. President, would you try to clear up the continuing controversy over the reported disagreements on abortion between your nominee for Health and Human Services and yourself? Are you in sync? Is he in sync with you? Does it matter? Do you have to be absolutely in sync as long as once in office he would support your position?
Well, I think that last point is the important point, but also we are in sync. And so I have a person who has stood in front of you all when I nominated him and said that, and I have no reason to think anything different. Yeah.
Yes, Mr. President, a few moments ago you talked about on your No New Taxes pledge, the idea that you'd like it to be a 4-year pledge, and that does appear to be a softening of language from the campaign. I wonder, has anything that Mr. Darman or any of your advisors told you changed your mind about the duration of that pledge, revenues needed, and so on?
No, that hasn't changed my mind, anything in the last few days of talking like that. Yeah.
Mr. President, we've heard a lot about your position on abortion this week because of Mr. Sullivan. Are you planning any initiatives from the White House related to abortion, or are you going to wait and see what the Supreme Court does, number one? And number two, as a person who's always, from what we know, had the financial and emotional resources to know that you could raise your children comfortably, do you feel any awkwardness about telling other people whose situations you don't know how they should run their lives?
Not when it comes to the question of life. I do feel an awkwardness in terms of having been able to take care of my kids when they were sick or raise them properly or something like that. I feel a certain privilege. I feel a certain, I was very fortunate in that regard, and I know a lot of people aren't. But on this issue, I think we're talking here of principle, and I sure would like to put the emphasis on adoption, and that means a broader acceptance of that principle.
Are you going to have any White House initiatives, or are you going to wait for the Supreme Court?
I think probably wait, but I have been pledged, as you know, to an amendment, but I'd like to see the Supreme Court decision as soon as possible.
Mr.
One,
President,
two, three.
Mr. President, a Tehran radio report this morning seems to indicate that they are rejecting your statement of a week ago today that goodwill would beget goodwill. While you didn't specifically mention Iran by name in your speech, what would your message to them be on relations, and what would your message be to them about helping get the hostages out?
Well, I would make a broad appeal, transcending Iran, to anybody that can be helpful to get the hostages out. Perhaps I haven't seen the wire copy, but perhaps they're, if there is such a story by them, maybe they're saying, well, look, we're not holding your hostages. And I'd have to say, well, from our intelligence, our information, that's probably correct. Probably correct. In terms of the future, there was a period of time when we had excellent relations with Iran. And I don't want to think that the status quo has to go on forever, but I do think that the renunciation of terror in any form and a facilitating, to the degree they can, the release of the hostages would be a couple of good steps they could take. Yeah.
Follow up, Mr. President? Follow up on that?
No, you don't get to follow his question. And then here.
Mr. President, reaching
I
out,
get these ground serious.
you've spoken frequently about reaching out to blacks, that you want that to be an important goal of your administration. This week, the Supreme Court issued a decision that may kill many of the minority set-aside programs that have been so helpful to blacks across this country. Does that concern you? Are you worried about these programs?
It didn't kill all set-asides, and it didn't kill off affirmative action. I have been committed to affirmative action. I want to see a reinvigorated Office of Minority Business and Commerce. I want to see our SBA program go forward vigorously. And so I would say that that decision spoke to one set of facts, in Richmond, I believe it was. And but don't read in. I will not read into that a mandate to me to stop trying on equal employment and on the affirmative action generally. Yeah.
You said during the campaign, Mr. President, that you would roll back taxes on capital gains if elected. Now, as you begin to look at the budget numbers, is that going to be a promise you can keep when you make your submission to Congress, or is that no longer affordable?
I hope it's affordable. It gains you revenue. And we got a big argument with some people about that. They don't want to go back and look at what happened in 1978. It gains revenue. Now, I know we got all kinds of bureaucracies around here that doesn't agree with that. But that was discussed in the campaign. I'm convinced it will bring in additional revenue and in the process create additional jobs for men and women. So I would like to see it a fundamental part of whatever we do. Now, if your question is, can I get it done? That's something else again. But I want to see it done. There was an issue in that campaign where there was clear difference. That was one where there was clear difference. The opposition was saying, my opponent is proposing something that'll cost the taxpayer $30 billion. And I'm saying it'll create jobs. And indeed, I've seen estimates by intelligent people thinking it'll bring in revenues in excess of $4 billion. And so I'm going to keep pushing that because I know it's right. And I ran on it. Yeah, Robbie.